Even if the founder of the business is dealing with it all, at some point they won't be able to, because you just can't put your hands on everything. And it's not really until they get to that, is it overwhelm? Sometimes it's complete overwhelm. I've had tears at that point, but sometimes it's just that feeling of, I don't know why I've got all these people, because, I'm still involved in everything. And it's a bit of a process. They gradually realise that they can't keep going the same way.
Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. In each episode, we bring together leaders from optometry, optical dispensing, and business to share insights, practical strategies, and the latest developments shaping independent practice today. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore how innovation, collaboration, and smart business thinking can drive growth, enhance patient care, and strengthen the future of independent optometry. Whether you're a student, an early career professional, or an established practice owner, The Focused View is your go-to source for knowledge, inspiration, and connection. The Focused View is brought to you by Vision Connection, supporting independent eye care professionals across Australia through collaboration, education, and business growth. By working closely with leading suppliers and industry partners, Vision Connection offers unique opportunities that help independents stand out and succeed. To find out more, visit their website, visionconnection.com.au.
Jenny, welcome to the show. Really excited to have you on today.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well.
Today's conversation is going to be really, holistic is one way to put it, where we're going to step back and we're going to look at the business as a whole and really examine it. And what's, I think, going to be more insightful is the fact that you're not optical orientated. So we're going to speak about business in a very general sense, but it's good to know that in optometry and in optical business, it's not different to any other type of business, really, with its fundamentals. And we'll touch on that in a whole heap of ways today. But before we really deep dive all of that, a bit of background into yourself. Can you tell us and the audience a bit about who you are, your background, and what's brought you to the point where you are today?
Okay, I guess I've got slightly unusual background. I've got both the corporate background. I, sort of worked my way up the corporate ladder. I was CEO of a publicly listed company. I've had CEO roles of other companies. And in between those roles, I've started my own consultancy businesses. So I used to have a marketing business many, many years ago, and I had an advisory business. And now this is the third iteration where I advise founders of growing companies, high six figures, low seven figures, and advise them on how to manage the challenges that come with growth, but also to start thinking about building more value into their companies when they exit. So it's an end-to-end process for me, which I love doing. I love it.
And that led you to write a book about the topic. And can you tell us a bit about the book?
The books. The last one was The 7% Club, how to be one of the 7% of businesses that make it beyond 2 million in turnover, which I think is quite a startling statistic. And then I explored some of the reasons why that might happen, why people don't go beyond the 2 million mark. So that was the focus of that book. And the next one I'm working on is about strategic exit preparation.
Yeah, and I guess what's really interesting from our industry is, specifically with who we are speaking to through this podcast, are mainly business owners. And a lot of them are small to medium-sized businesses, between 2 and maybe 10 staff members, turnovers, depending on the situation, anywhere between maybe 500,000 to that $2 million figure. And obviously, and more, but that would be the general. So I guess there's a real sweet spot there with the activities that you work on and that you've mentioned. And I'm sure our businesses are facing as well in the context of where they're at. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting insights that will come from today's conversation. As we get into it, one of the things that I like to, when I'm speaking to people about business in general, is I have this saying where you start with the end in mind. And when you're looking at business, building a valuable asset, a saleable asset, and I think that would be something that you'd be pretty familiar with as a concept. But can you explain to us a little bit about that concept and how that translates from, say, a good job and doing something well to creating something that's valuable as a business?
Yeah, sure. I think it's interesting because I call it the take money on the way through model and then the get it on the end. So there's a lot of business owners that they want more of a lifestyle. They want a manageable, profitable business. They don't want to, really grow it that big, but they pay themselves well and they're not necessarily thinking about the asset. They're thinking about funding their lifestyle as they go along. And that applies to a lot of business owners. Then there's the other model where you can still pay yourself well on the way through, but you're really looking at building an asset that you can sell at the end. So what does that asset look like? Number one, it doesn't have you in it. So that's the big thing. If I want to sell my business at some point in the future, how am I going to structure my business model and all the resources around it so that I can sell it to someone else who can take it and run with it, and I'm not part of that picture? And that's really important because once you start shifting your thinking to how could my business be a really valuable entity for somebody else without me in it, that really adjusts your thinking about the business model and how you structure your resources and the shifts that have to make inside the business for that to happen. It's just a very different way of looking at it.
Then one thing I want to pick up on is in the industry that we're in, the business that we generally are dealing with, that business owner is generally the key person in the business as well. And so I guess with what you're explaining there, and I'm a massive fan of that concept. And I feel like for a business to really work, it has to work without you in it. Otherwise, you're basically enslaved to it. But at the same time, especially say if we're dealing with optometrists and they are the clinical professional too, and there is a doctor or physio, or there's such an inherent element of goodwill in that clinician or that healthcare professional doing what they're doing. If they are removed, then the dynamic of that business changes. So I think because of that too, a lot of independent business owners feel that without them, the business is as successful. So from the mindset point of view, how would somebody that's thinking about this approach it, knowing that they are probably a really integral part of the operation? And if they are removed, it's not. But that's not to say that in the future it couldn't be. How do you deal with people, or how have you seen situations like that unpack when they are a small business and they are so important, but they realize that if they do want this to grow, it has to be a bit more than them?
Yeah, great question. There's a couple of aspects to that. Number one is to make sure that the business and the team can run without your decision making and without things being escalated to you. So it can run, you've got processes, you've got systems, everyone knows what their part is in that ecosystem of your business. So you've got to start thinking about the operational involvement, not your technical expertise, but your operational involvement. So start to make sure that you've got the systems, the processes, the checklists, the flow, how the business works. And then another thing I do, it's a different type of business, but when I work with companies like design companies or engineering companies or niche construction companies, it's to start capturing the IP. So it's usually the founder that has the specialized IP of, when they look at a problem or a situation or a patient, it's just their nuance from years and years of experience. Why did you look at that? What made you go to there? And to start capturing that, that's really invaluable because there's so much experience in that person's head. To start to try and bring that out and capture that for the whole business is really important. And then the other aspect is thinking about who might buy your business further down the track. I'm sure there's different types of acquirers that would be interested in that sort of business. And I'm sure a lot of them would also be the expert. And they want to step into a business that's bigger than them, well structured, well run, captured the IP, and they can continue to build on that with new services or new locations. So that's a key part of it as well, thinking about who might acquire my business rather than just leaving it to chance and waiting until you go, okay, I'm ready to sell now, I'll call a broker. You've got to be intentionally strategic about that. Who might buy it? Who are we kind of packaging this business up for? And it might be 10 years down the track. But start to think about that as well, because that's a key piece strategically.
Yeah, and I guess that will help you make your decisions today. And I think that's when you preface a question like that in the context of what you're doing, and many don't. And in our industry specifically, I don't think that's really a big thinking. I think it's becoming more and more prevalent, but definitely the ones that say are transitioning now out of, depending on their circumstances, and there's a whole array of them, but primarily there hasn't been much thought. And from what I've seen, it is some high-end offers that have just come through and just maybe by luck with regards to goings on within the industry at the moment. And not to get into those too deeply, but there's been a little bit of luck, I think, in some capacity. But there definitely maybe hasn't been as much strategy for the most part. So I do love that. I love the word strategy, and I think that's a really important thing. With small businesses specifically, when it does come time to sell, why do you think so many business owners struggle to sell, and I guess to move on from all of it when it does come time to sell? And I guess this might touch on maybe the emotional component as well in some capacity. But can you speak to what that looks like, and I guess how you've seen it handled in the past?
Yeah. It's a huge part of it. You're right. That emotional aspect is enormous, because the founder has to be ready and the business to be, and they both have to be ready to optimize the value. And the strategy part is, I'm going to say it's easy. It's not necessarily easy, but it's far more straightforward. It's more left brain. But then we get into the emotional stuff, and, it gives founders a sense of purpose. It gives them a reason to get up in the morning. It's their whole life, and it may have been their life for 30 or 40 years. So I personally think it's equally as important to work with a founder to start getting them thinking about what next. Do I want to stay involved in the industry? Do I want to mentor other business owners that are maybe just starting out or coming through? Do I want to be on an industry board and be involved that way? Because I think we all have heard stories of people who sell their business and yay, I'm done. And they go traveling around the world and they go and play golf and do all this stuff. And then after 12 months, they go, all right, well, I'm bored to sobs now. Or alternatively, they've been chained to the business they're selling for 12 months because it is so dependent upon them that the incoming new owner leaves them there as a sort of an insurance policy. And you don't want that to happen either. So when I work with founders going through this, I take them through that whole mindset approach of being ready from a day-to-day perspective to kind of step out. That's part of the process. But then that whole emotional piece of what are we moving towards now? Let's look at what next. What could be really engaging and fulfilling and give you purpose for the what next piece. And once they really start thinking about that, it can really excite them of a new opportunity or something that's very positive once they've left their business behind. But if you don't go down that path, it can be not soul destroying, but a lot of founders are left just wondering, what do they do? And they lack purpose. I was talking to someone the other day, and she built a law practice, a family law practice, and she sold it when she was 70, but never once did she think about what next. Now she's in her late 70s and she's very astute and wants to do something else, but she's absolutely floundering. And you don't want to be there. So you have to start thinking about the what next, what would give me fulfillment, what are the different opportunities. It's a really important piece. You're so right about that.
Yeah, and I think obviously selling your business or getting into the position of selling, obviously being mindful of that's important, as opposed to it being the onus of the buyer to check in to see what the seller is going to be doing. It's more emphasis there on the seller to really check in with that and map that out, because similarly, and I would imagine that, and this is just a generalization, that the same person that sells the business and doesn't necessarily have a plan probably didn't have a plan to sell the business when they started their business either. So it's almost cyclical in nature. If you're planning the business to sell from the beginning, well, then you're probably thinking about the end as well. What does that look like And so there's probably a little bit of a hand-in-hand sort of scenario there. But if we flip back to the buyer's perspective and where the buyer's at too, what does a buyer, in your experience, what does a buyer see that would immediately increase or decrease the value of buying a business? And obviously in the context of what we're talking about in optometry practice, but just in general too, what are the sort of the key things a buyer's checking in for and a seller should keep in mind when they're getting to that phase or as they're building to that phase? And that could be a 10-year period.
Yeah. There's three key things. Number one, we've touched on, which is the transferability. So that's very much about ensuring that the business is not entirely dependent upon the founder. So that's having the right team around you, having the right processes, the core processes that run your business, the right systems. So the business, as I said before, it's an ecosystem that runs without the founder's direct involvement. So that transferability piece is definitely what an acquirer is looking for. The other thing, and I'm sure everyone listening has probably heard of due diligence. When you're selling a business and you go through due diligence, it's all about evidence. Do you have the evidence that backs up what you're saying about your business? So, we've been a highly profitable practice for the last 3 years. Well, where are the figures? We have this many customers. We've got a very high return rate or retention rate with our customers. This is our retail sales. All that has to be documented. Even if you do a budget for the next year, what are your assumptions? How have you performed against budgets in previous years? Do you consistently miss the mark by a mile? Or do you really understand this business and what you think you're going to bring in is pretty close to what actually happens? So building all that evidence of customer lists and contracts and agreements and numbers, all of that evidence to support the package that you're selling is really critical. Now, if you've got evidence and you've got transferability, you can sell your business for, a good rate compared to those businesses that don't have those things in place, which are really going to struggle. So if you've got that all organized, you'll be able to sell your business and sell it at a good multiple. But the third component is strategic advantage. So if there's something about your business that offers a strategic advantage that's going to help the acquirer to get more market share faster or to really ramp up their database of clients, things that really justify a premium price for your business, that is definitely a factor to start thinking about as well. Now, not everyone can do that. Some people just need to give it more thought and package up what they've already got to make their business different from others in their industry. But certainly the evidence and the transferability are key.
Yeah, I think that a couple of things that have come to mind as you've said that. Obviously, processes are critical and having structures and processes. And that's not something that we're going to speak about today with regards to what they look like for a specific optical store. We've got a lot of podcast episodes about that and obviously a lot more to come, because what makes a good and efficient and successful optometry practice is in essence very similar for independent practice. But I think that's really critical. The ability for it to run without the person, I think, is important when it comes to tying in the evidence. Because what we see so often is that because someone's been in the practice as the lead for 30 or 40 years, they think what they've built, just because of what they've built, is all it is enough. And it's that evidence component. But almost if you're looking at selling your business and someone's going to buy it and you're not a part of that anymore, then there's a drop in value straight away, I would imagine, just because you're no longer part of that business, and therefore that goodwill, and we refer to it a lot as goodwill in our industry. What's the goodwill that the practice has built? And so often with optometry practices, the goodwill is tied with the optometrist, say, who's providing clinical service, and you can't really replace that. If they are not there, then that goodwill is effectively gone. And they use that so much from what I've seen, as a negotiating tool, which can't be evidenced necessarily, or the evidence is whatever the financial figures are. So I think tidying that up is really critical. And yeah, with small businesses, you see it all the time. They don't pay themselves a salary. So, and they just take the profits of the business. And it's something you need to work that in, because you're going to need to replace that person. So DD and due diligence is critical. You're getting lawyers, you're getting accountants coming together, brokers, people that are in the know in that regard. with regards to the business and what that looks like. But the one thing that you touched on at the end there was the strategic advantage. And I think for practices and independent practices, that relates a lot to maybe specializations that they've gone into and being having a special care of optometry as opposed to being a generalist, which are more like your Specsavers models and your franchise models, which are obviously up a part of the industry, but not a part that we speak to. And I think I was touching on that earlier when I said at the moment because I think strategic advantage is not something that you can necessarily plan for. It's a timing thing too. So in our industry at this point in time, there is a conglomerate that's buying independent practices because they've got perhaps a plan and a big plan. What that might be, you can speculate. But what is part of it is to build their database. And because they've got a strategic plan that is for them, it wasn't necessarily a strategic plan the store had to maximize its sale value, but there's just been a lack of timing that people that are looking to sell now, and maybe part of that lack is because this particular conglomerate has identified the nature of the industry and the stage of the industry and where it's at, and they've seen that as the opportunity and they've gone strategically in on that, and they have, and they've obviously turned out making offers that are just very strong, not a less evidence-based and more strategic for them. So I guess for strategy and strategic advantage as an independent practice, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. It's sometimes luck, but if it is something that you're going to plan for, what are some of the ways that you can plan for that? And is it all about processes or is it about something else?
That's a really good point because often it is luck. It's driven by the acquirer. But again, if you are building to sell in the future, you do need to shift that focus from the founder perspective to the acquirer perspective and think, well, what would an acquirer want? And the customer base, absolutely. I mean, that's a starting point for every business. And so making sure that you've packaged up that customer base, like here are all the customers, this is the repeat, this is the tenure. So it's not just, oh yeah, here's our database. You've really packaged it up for something that an acquirer could look at. There's a lot of upside in this. It could be systems that you use and how you communicate with your customers or how you onboard them. So a little bit goes to what you said about processes. It could be something in your processes that can be rolled out in other practices. It could be the number of practices you have, an acquirer in a roll-up situation. Let's just, instead of growing our own, let's just buy and build and get market share really quickly because that's what they want. They want market share. They want to acquire multiples of revenue, not just through organic growth. They want upside. So you could have a massive customer list and you know that those customers could also be ripe for an additional service, which you've identified but you haven't yet developed. So an acquirer sees massive potential upside that hasn't been taken advantage of yet. So it's just about shifting that focus to what could an acquirer be interested in if they want to grow quickly as opposed to how I've grown organically.
And I guess other than revenue, and that's a big part of creating value and seeing the value, what other, indicators are you looking at or that have you seen that are really important other than revenue that stand out for you? And I guess what do they look like and what are things for us to be mindful of when we're thinking about creating this asset?
Well, margin is always more important than revenue. The profitability in a business is key. When people talk about revenue and there's nothing on the bottom line, there's something wrong with the business. That's a big one. And having the right dashboards that show where the value is in the company, like, how quickly you can deliver to a customer. So instead of, servicing 10 a day, we can do 15 a day, which drives our profitability. Things like that. I think value is very much in the team as well, the people you have around you, not having too many people in your team, having the right number of people. So if you look back over the previous, say, 3 to 5 years, is your revenue per person in your business and your margin and your profitability per person tracking? So if you're adding people and those indicators are declining, then that's not a good a good indicator of value and how you're utilizing your resources. Things like that.
Do you think that your pricing discipline, I mean, we mentioned the margin, I think, looking at net profit, for example, and understanding that as a number and how that's made up is really critical. Again, falls into the due diligence side of things when you're looking at purchasing. But do you think that you need to be articulate in a sale about what those mechanics are and what they look like so that a potential buyer would be able to understand? Or is it on them to basically figure it out themselves?
That's an interesting question. I think if you're trying to point out an advantage, you'd want to make it front and center. Yeah, that's why these dashboards are important, because you can just high level show someone
Yeah.
this is where the value is.
And I think that's important because for me, the power in this, and we're talking in the context of selling the business, but I think this is something that should be done as a health check at any point in time, in the assumption of, let's say I did sell my business today, run through the exercise, how am I sitting? Because that will give you a true indicator of, am I able to sell it now? And if I could, what would it be based on these particular figures? And I think the more you closely align to that, the more perhaps successfully the business may be run. And this is very much a high level thought process, because you're going to dig deeper in understanding how do I run or make the better business. But I think the key and why we're mentioning this and why I want to speak about this in the way that we are is because all of these things that we're speaking about don't necessarily, they obviously apply if you're selling, right? It goes without saying. But I think they apply even if you're not, purely because you're starting with that end in mind and you're constantly checking yourself in and against, I guess the market, for lack of a better term, because what the market is willing to pay is what the value of the practice is, regardless of what necessarily you think. But if you're running those particular, and I guess with that in mind, are there activities that you think that should be done consistently from a business point of view to just check in with how they're going with the processes, the way they're sitting, so that if they were to sell on the hypothetical, what that would be worth? Or do you think that's maybe time better used elsewhere?
Good question. I think, there's an old saying, inspect what you expect. So you expect certain things are happening in your business, but when you look closely, you realize they're not. So I think just having that continual view of the different service lines, what the revenue is against the budget, what the profitability is from the retail sales, is the margin where it should be. And it sounds really basic, but a lot of people don't even look at it. That's not even granular. That's just breaking it down. And even with service businesses, and I know it's a different model, but I've seen companies where we look at, say, 3-5 of the top biggest clients they have. And when we really drill down into it, the clients might be high value in terms of revenue, but 1 or 2 of them could be almost costing money because of the resources that they're using, and they haven't had a fee increase for ages. And when you look at it, you go, oh my God, like it's adding X to our top line, but it's really eroding our margin. We've got to increase our fees or move this client on. And difficult decisions, but once you make them, it has such a positive impact on the business. So those reviews, maybe the numbers certainly regularly, because I'm very big on the numbers, but just doing that granular look at where the business is making money, is it still making the profitability that you expect it is, even 6 months, certainly every 12 months, just check that you are getting what you expect in the business.
You highlighted a really good example there with regards to looking at revenue and not maybe looking at the full picture. And if you did look at the full picture, you might have a different perspective. Are there other financial blind spots that, you've seen that have eroded businesses, or, that quietly, unknowingly undermining the business, although it might be seen as otherwise, that I guess at first glance?
Yeah, I think sometimes, hidden expenses. So you might have your P&L when people do P&Ls, they often just take a figure that occurs maybe twice a year. It could be, I don't know, insurance, let's just say. And they just break it down. Oh, let's just average that over 12 months. So it's X dollars a month, which is fine. So it doesn't happen for 6 months. And then in month 6, it's a really big expense that hasn't really been accounted for. So they need to go into the P&L where they actually belong, because all that flows into the cash flow. And there are so many companies that don't do cash flow forecasting. I can't tell you. I cannot tell you how many don't do it. And
Sounds like an episode in its own right.
it actually is. It really is. And it's a great discipline. And if your business is flying and doing really well, fantastic. You can look at your cash flow, give yourself a pat on the back and celebrate. But if it's starting to look a little stressed, that's when you really need to go back and say, okay, what's happening? Are our terms not right? Are our pricing levels aren't right? What are we doing here? Our expenses, we're not accounting for all of them. So I think that whole discipline of budgeting, P&L forecasting, cash flow forecasting, it's just 101, but it's really important. And every business owner should do it, whether you're 400,000 or 4 million or 40 million. It's really important.
And on that note, if we pivot a little bit here, many businesses plateau at a certain level. And I know one of the things that you speak about is going from that 2 million level and above. But let's just assume that we're working with, or there's a successful business out there and they've essentially plateaued for one reason or another. What can businesses do, I guess, from a top level? In your experience, how many of the businesses that you've worked with have hit a plateau? And at what level does it normally happen from your experience?
It's pretty much follows a pattern. It's that low 7 figures, because the more you grow, you've got more customers and more people to manage and more transactions in the business. And even if the founder of the business is dealing with it all, at some point they won't be able to, because you just can't put your hands on everything. And it's not really until they get to that, is it overwhelmed? Sometimes it's complete overwhelm. I've had tears at that point. But sometimes it's just that feeling of, I don't know why I've got all these people, because I'm still involved in everything. And it's a bit of a process. They gradually realize that they can't keep going the same way. And so shifts need to be made in the business. But the biggest shift to start with is with the founder, because I call it the shift from business owner to CEO. They need to look at their business differently, and they need to look at their role differently. And unless they do that, they will stay at that plateau, because you can't go any further with that model.
I want to unpack that a little bit more, because I feel there are a lot of players in our industry at that particular point where, and again, it's on the context of the store, because there are some people, depending on what the end goal is, it is to build something that gets them through, and that's enough. And so I guess we're not speaking of those, but there are a certain percentage of, I guess, high sort of operators that want to challenge themselves and want to go the next step and want to evolve their business, and that have reached their limit. And then it's about now, like you've just said, pivoting from being the founder, or that founder mentality, to a CEO mentality. And it doesn't happen too often in our industry from an independent point of view. But because, again, more often than not, that will translate in saying, okay, I want to go from 1 store to 2 stores, or I want to go from 2 stores to 3 stores. Very rarely, from an independent point of view, is one owner or having more than 3 stores. There are a few, but then that ties into a bit of a different structure. But let's say we're owning the practice. We've got 1 store. We're going to go to 2 stores. What are the biggest things from a mindset point of view that you touched on there with regards to being a founder to a CEO? What are some of the biggest challenges, but where you've seen people be successful in making that transition? What has that looked like, and what has been, and I don't know if it's different for everyone, what has been the biggest aha moment for those kind of people that, I get it, Jenny, like now I get what you're saying, now I can see it?
Yeah. Okay, first of all, I think it's a really important exercise to look at your practice, whether it's 1 or whether you're going to 2, and look at, the different aspects of the practice. There's the delivery, there's, say, retail management, there's the marketing, and there's the financial, all those aspects of the business. And then there's let's call it the leader role. So what should the founder or the owner of that business be doing as they expand? So they can't be in each of those boxes. They can't be the ones that are, doing the bass and dealing with customers and managing orders and suppliers, So it's really important to map out in the business what needs to be done and who is responsible for it. And then have we got a gap, or should we delegate part of this role to other people? And the really interesting thing about that exercise is that I've actually gone through that with owners of companies, and they are in every part of the business. They put themselves in, oh no, I have to check that. I do that with such and such. But the section that is just for them, which is running the business, at a higher level, like looking at the financials as we just talked about, thinking about the strategic direction, those sorts of things, they're not in any of that. So they're not doing their job. They're doing the job with everyone else. So that's a real eye-opener to help them see where they are in the business and where they should be. So that tells them where they need to transition to. But I think the other aspect is once they've done that and there are processes and systems in place, it's what I call the dance of trust. So it's a real transition, and it's like they're not willing to take the first step away unless they can trust the fact that there is someone who will take the baton and run with it. It's like, well, if I don't get involved in this, if I'm not part of this, it's going to fall over. But once they can start to see that there is someone in the business or their team can look after things, okay, well, I can step out now. That they can do that. And it's just this dance backwards and forwards until finally, they can start to do the things that their skill set is good for, where they can add the most value to the business. But it can take quite a long time. It can take months and months, this dance of trust. But once they go down that path and they know that they trust that they can delegate, it's a huge shift because they never go back then. They never go back.
Yeah, that's extremely powerful, but somewhat so much out of your control event that's got to occur. And when that happens, that trust, because obviously when you're a founder and if you're a small business owner and you've started it from scratch and you built it to what it is, you're going to have this inherent thought that it's not the same without you. Do you feel like when someone has to find that person of trust or that person that's going to, that's going to be able to effectively have those tasks on them to be responsible for, is it the fact that the founder generally doesn't want to trust them more often the case, or is it the fact that those people just don't exist as the founder thinks in their mind? I guess my question in some ways, is it the founder that's the problem in that scenario more often than not, or is it aren't there not that many good people out there? What would be in your experience and from what you've seen?
It's all of those things. It's usually the founder's the problem because it's their belief system. They built it from the ground up. I need to be involved. So that's their very firm belief. If they don't have the right person or people to be able to step up and narrow that capability gap, then that's a different situation that we need to address. But it's not usually that they don't want to give it to someone unless it's clearly the wrong person. It's that they don't want to let go. It's about them. And until as I said, it's just a very gradual thing that eventually they will let go and they'll never look back. But it's the start that's the hardest part and the biggest transition.
And what I've said to people in that scenario, in that situation that I've come across, it's always, in my opinion, it's somebody from within. Very rarely are you going to be recruiting for this particular person. And if you do, it's at least a 6 to 12 month process before you can even start to, because if you've got a team of somewhat and you're bringing somebody in and within the first 2 months, they're that person, then all of a sudden you're going to perhaps lose some credibility with the other team members, from that point of view too. So I think at first instance, it's going to be somebody from within that maybe you've overseen or you haven't necessarily at first instance thought of. But if you're in that particular mindset, that would be the first. And if not, then you recruit. And that obviously is in difficult because you've got to find the right person to then start that tango or that dance. that you're referring to, and that could elongate, which is fine, depending on time, how much time you have. But if you're being strategic, which is a word that we used sort of early on, it's something that you plan for, and you don't, because so many people luck into it. And there are a lot of businesses that I've interacted with, and in my own business where, you've got people that are just superstars, and you've just lucked into getting them right. And so it's like, well, imagine the business without these people, and you can't, but there wasn't any strategy in it. But if there was strategy in it, then it's like, once that's identified, well, then what can we do to delegate? And I say this a lot because I'm going through a lot of this at the moment. So it's very relatable to me in a whole heap of different ways. But that's the exciting part from my point of view, sort of seeing it and being able to speak to it specifically. With regards to, the small percentage of businesses that can do this, other than the obvious that they're going to be successful, what are some of the other benefits that you see, or what are some of the other advantages from this kind of mindset and being able to find that person who you can trust and, I guess, evolve with?
Being able to find that person, I think you've got to have a really robust recruitment system. Still, I see, I sit in on interviews sometimes with my clients, and they're not listening enough. They're doing all the talking. They walk out of there and they say they like the person. And it's like, well, whoa, hang on a minute. We need to, and I always say, before you go into an interview with someone, let's say you're interviewing 4 people, you need to know, what are your key criteria? What are the things you're really looking for in terms of capability, experience, attitude, fit with the culture, and be really clear on those things, that when you interview each person, you can score them like out of 5. This person's a 3, they could do the job, versus this person's a superstar 5. And I find that really useful, because after you've interviewed people, you can look back and you could say, well, these 2 scored 23 out of 25. The others didn't get anywhere near that. What's the difference between these 2? And, I bring people back in for another interview with the other team members. So it gives the potential candidate a chance to say, well, what's it really like, working? What's the vibe like? What's the culture like? What's it like to work for such and such? And they can get a feel for each other before it goes to the next stage. So have a really clear, structured recruitment process, so you know what you are recruiting for and how you're going to rate the people that you interview, as opposed to just some less structured process where you tend to recruit people that you get on really well with, but they may not be the right fit.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think, a skill to recruitment in its own right. Small businesses don't do it very often, therefore, they're not the best at it. It's almost, I'll use the analogy, I'm a bit mindful of it, but it's out of industry. But, you've got a buyer that's buying a house, and they go in, and every weekend they go into open homes, and they might be doing it for 3 or 4 weeks, but they're interacting, with a real estate agent that's a complete expert in the field, and they completely own that situation. And the buyer still thinks that they're getting the best of it, but they don't realize, and if they're a good real estate agent, how well that scenario is not really going in their favor. And again, maybe not the best analogy, but when we're recruiting as a small business owner, you're not doing it a lot. And if you're not doing it a lot, you're not going to be that good at it, despite what you may think. And so often they go with the gut instinct, and it's the complete wrong decision from the point of view. Now, we might fluke, or you might fluke into it, and it might be the right decision. But what does that process look like? And again, without having to go too far into it, I think that process is critical. We've actually got a process, and there is one which is on psychometric testing based on specifically. So in the model that we have, we actually don't look at the resume until about 6 or 7 steps in, because the resume obviously is not the first thing. But that's, I think, a really critical thing. And if there's anyone listening that's interested, obviously they're going to be able to reach out to you, Jenny, and we'll get your details. But also feel free to reach out to me and ask me with what that process might look like, so that for you as an independent practice, you could have a system, and that is there something you carries through. So it's not something, anytime you recruit, you will just employ the same. Again, it's one of those systems and processes that's really critical. But yeah, I think that recruitment is a really, it'll make or break your business. I mean, people make or break your business.
Yeah.
So it's a really one of the most critical parts, over and above the other things that were spoken about. As quickly as you can, or if from a summary point of view, because I'm sure there's heaps here, but what the most main points are, when you were writing the book and, working with the business that you work with, What separates the 7% that grow above 2 million?
Ambition, intention. There are those people who want to. I spoke to someone recently and she said, I just want to build an empire. And she actually is, because she's got a bigger picture game plan. Other people don't want that. They're happy to have a lifestyle business and to not be too stressed and to have a manageable, profitable business that looks after their life. And I think number one, if you do want to go beyond 2 million, clearly it's that willingness to understand that your role has to shift. That's a huge part of it. You can't be in the weeds every day if you want to grow something. You have to look at it differently, approach it differently. So your own shift as the founder is absolutely critical to growth beyond 2 million. And then once you've made that shift in your mind, then the other shifts in the business can happen, systems and processes and building your A team and strategic focus. But I think it's that initial shift from, do I really want this? Do I really want to go for that? And then making that shift in your mind, that's the big differentiator. It's that intention to build something much bigger.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess as we start to wrap up today's conversation, I've really appreciated it. I mean, these are conversations I could speak for days about this sort of stuff because, there is so much to unpack on so many levels. But I guess to ensure that we get some take homes for the listeners, I guess as we wrap up, what are the most important questions that you think every business owner should regularly check in with themselves or ask themselves about the health of their business, about the future of their business, about their just business in general? What would be the top most important questions, in your opinion, that they should be asking regularly about themselves?
Well, I think number one goes back to what we said before, the numbers. Are the numbers what I'm expecting? And it's amazing how many times they're not. So that's a really important question. Is the business performing the way I want it to perform? And I think the other thing is on the customer side. Are we still relevant and adding value to our customers? Is that changing at all? Have we dropped the ball? Are we still focused on a great experience, adding great value, retaining those customers, getting them to come back? That's really important. And I think another one is in terms of relevance. Are we still as relevant to our customers as we were when they first came to us? So it could be, are there other services we could be delivering? Are there other products we could be delivering? As the next generation, we could be looking after, how can we be more innovative with that? So not being complacent about what you do and who you do it for, but just staying across what your customers are thinking and maybe wanting more of or wanting help with that you're not currently doing. So I think those three are pretty important.
Yeah, I think as society changes and the market changes and technology changes, and we're very much an industry that is attuned with that, whether it's the likes of the smart glasses that are coming in or what the younger generation are aspiring for or what they want out of their eyewear and the products that we sell. I think that's a critical check-in. Today is not a conversation about the specifics of how to actually do the check-in or what you should be checking in with and all that sort of stuff. That's a very different type of conversation. Today is a bit more sort of looking back, big picture, some big ticket items that we need to be thinking about that then gets the mindset going with regards to what should we be looking at. Obviously, we're here to support in that particular way, as are a heap of other players in the industry with regards to who anyone's getting advice and support from. Definitely expanding your network and speaking to people, asking questions, I think are really critical in all of that. But Jenny, I guess, are there any parting words of wisdom that you have for the audience as we start to wrap up today?
Well, I think I don't want to overload everyone. I think I've given some good food for thought. But again, it's looking to the future. What do you want to create? Don't create something because you feel you should. Create what you want, what's going to make you happy. Because I'm a firm believer that your business should enable you, not tether you. And if you've got, the right strategy at the right time, better strategy, better business, better life. And that's why we're doing it. So I think that's important. Just make sure you're happy doing what you do.
Yeah. I think that's a trick to make it feel like you're not working as well, right? Find something that you love and do something that you love, and it doesn't feel like you're working at all.
Exactly.
So no, I totally resonate with that. So thank you so much. If people want to get in touch with you or seek your advice out with regards to business and strategy and what they're doing, and if they're on the right path, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Go to my website, jennystilwell.com.au, 1L in the middle, 2 on the end, or DM me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, cool. And we'll have all of those links in the show notes. So if anyone wants to reach out to Jenny, feel free to do so. Other than that, Jenny, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciated it. I've enjoyed our conversation thoroughly, and hopefully we'll get to chat again at some point in the future.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Michael. It's been really interesting.
Thanks for listening to The Focused View. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review, subscribe on your preferred podcast app, and share it with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals across Australia. For additional resources and downloads, visit thefocusedview.com.au. I'm Michael Nasser. Until next time, keep focused.